Okay, we're going to talk about a certain kind of trust called revocable living trust. There are a lot of different kinds of trusts out there for a lot of different reasons, but the trust we're going to talk about today is the one called revocable or revocable living trust, meaning you can amend it once you create it, you can revoke it, and you stay in total control of all of those assets that are in it. Like a will, a revocable living trust is a written document that explains how you want your property transferred and who you want it transferred to. But you're not writing it for the benefit of a judge, because in most cases a judge never has to see this document. This document remains very private and is never filed with the court. The only time it might be is if you have an heir or a beneficiary or someone that contests your trust and brings you into court. Otherwise, there's nothing that requires it to go to court. Like a will, you name the person that's going to step into your shoes and distribute your property. In a will, it's called a personal representative or an executor. In a trust, it's called a successor trustee. Trusts do avoid probate. They are, like I said, private documents that hopefully will never see the inside of a courtroom. They're very private in that, you can't look them up on CaseNet. They don't get published in the newspaper. And hopefully things will go smoothly, and only the successor trustee and the heirs that are entitled to assets under your trust will have to look at your trust. In a will situation, there are many, many people who touch that trust throughout the probate process. You've got the judges and the clerks and the newspaper publishers and, just all kinds of, paralegals and legal secretaries that all have to touch that will essentially and make it help it finalize the process. Whereas a trust, it's only going to be the people that your successor trustee has to engage to help them get through the process. That might be an accountant or a lawyer or an appraiser, property appraiser. So it's very private. I like to give a little history of trusts because, number one, I think it's kind of interesting, and it helps me understand the second myth that I hear a lot in estate planning that I'd like to debunk for you today, and that is that a trust is only for the extremely wealthy people. Trust did kind of start out that way, and I think that's why they now have the reputation for being only for the very wealthy, when in fact the role of trusts have changed quite a bit over the years. Back in the 1800s, trusts were a thing. We didn't have estate taxes, transfer on wealth taxes like we do today. We didn't have financial advisors that help us manage our assets. And really, trusts were used for the very wealthy back then to keep the money in the family and easily transition it to the next generation so that they could maintain their social class within the context of the trust. Over time, those circumstances changed, and we began to have tax laws develop on the transfer of extreme wealth, and trusts then began to be used as a tool to avoid some of those taxes. Still kind of a thing for the super wealthy. Then in the 80s, social circumstances changed and that really affected trusts, and that is we had an explosion of divorces. We had an explosion of personal injury cases and judgments and lawsuits, people getting sued. And we had just financial advisors that continued to kind of proliferate and help us manage the money without having to have it in the context of a trust to manage it. So trusts began to kind of leave the world of just for the wealthy and managing wealth and kind of get distributed around estate planners that helped the everyday person manage their wealth, didn't have to have a trust to do that. And trusts began being viewed as something that helps protect you from creditors, lawsuits, sometimes estranged spouses, or if you lose your spouse and get remarried, trust can be a tool that helps your kids from maybe losing out on their inheritance if the new spouse kind of comes in and takes over. So the way trusts are incorporated into our society right now is they're really more of a tool that helps protect our assets, not so much manage our wealth. So it's very much useful to everybody. Trust can be a nice learning tool if you have a young person that's going to be inheriting wealth from you at some point, whether that's a child or a grandchild. If you're going to be keeping their assets in your trust for a period of time, you can begin to show them how to manage and prepare for their wealth by being a co-trustee of their own trust, or the sub-trust that lives within your trust for a period of time, so that there's a mature and seasoned trustee shoulder to shoulder with the young person that's coming up and getting ready to inherit. And over time, you can transition more and more responsibilities onto them to learn how to manage that inheritance. Trust can also be useful in that you can maintain what's called a lifetime asset protection trust within your trust. So if you have a child who's a special needs child on benefits, state benefits, you don't want them to inherit a big lump sum and disqualify them from that inheritance, then that money can live inside of your trust indefinitely and have, supplement that special need child's lifestyle without disqualifying them from their state benefits. And then when that child passes on, you can designate the assets to go then to another person outright. So those are handy if you've got not only just a special needs child, but maybe an adult child or grandchild that has a mental health problem or a substance abuse or a gambling problem, and you want them to benefit from your treasures, but you don't want them to ever have it outright. You need someone to be in charge of that, turn the valve on and off as their life circumstances wax and wane. So a little bit about the mechanics of a trust. We've talked about having a trust in place. The next thing that you need to think about is how you use it, how you get your assets into the trust. And I like to talk about that by analogizing it to a big red wagon. Let's say that the bucket of the wagon is the trust itself. You've put it in place, you've signed it, it's all tailor-made to your life circumstances. Now you need to get your assets in the trust, and you do that by retitling the asset from your name individually or as a married couple to the name of the trust. And when you do that, it magically gets into your red wagon. I recommend certain assets to be in your trust during your lifetime and certain other assets to go into your trust upon your death, but not live there during your lifetime. I think it's a good idea to have your house in the trust or any real estate that you own during your lifetime. Some of your, or most of your personal assets, your furnishings, your cattle, your pets, your tools, gun collections, artwork, all that stuff is really good to have in your trust during your lifetime. There's really no reason to have it live outside of your trust. There are other assets that are probably better suited to stay in your name individually while you're alive, and then to transfer on death to your trust. That would be things like your vehicles, motorcycles, boats, boat trailers, boat motors, things that you use and maybe buy and sell a little bit more often than you do your house. It can be kind of difficult to get a big long name of a trust on the back of a title. But more importantly, if you're in an accident, say in your vehicle, and it's owned by the trust and you've got to turn over documents, say the accident turns out to be your fault and you're getting sued, it's probably a better idea to not broadcast to the person who's suing you that you have a trust. Again, because of that old myth that where people think just because you have a trust, you must have a lot of money. I don't think you need to give them that information. You should make them work a little bit harder for it. So you've got your trust, you have funded your trust. And as long as you're alive and competent, you are in complete control of those assets still. It's not like somebody else owns them. It's like you still own them. You don't have to have anybody else's permission to buy and sell your assets. So I like to have you think of this person as being you. You've got a hold of your trust. That handle really represents the instructions in your trust. And as long as you've got a hold of the handle, you're guiding it around based on what the instructions in your trust are. If something happens to you, you pass away or you become incompetent, you're merely putting that handle down with all the instructions attached to your big red wagon, and someone else steps into your shoes, picks up that wagon, and is now in control, guiding them through the distribution process, and then finally depleting all of those assets. Someday they will all be dispersed and the wagon can be disassembled. But there's nothing standing in between you and the person that comes in and takes over control for you, like there is in a will. We've got the judge and the probate process that kind of stands in between your will and your beneficiaries. In a trust situation, it's just, the next person in line steps up, takes control, and begins following your instructions. And just real quick, these are just a couple more visuals. This line represents your life, and above the line is when you're alive and managing your assets. This box here in the middle is representative of the trust. I like your trust to look like this. You've established your trust, you've got your house, your pets, all that stuff, your jewelry, instruments, tools in your trust, and then you've got your motor vehicles and so forth, your simple bank accounts living outside of your trust, remaining in your individual names with a transfer on death to your trust. And then over here, we've got some assets that are treated a little bit differently than the other two categories. We've got your life insurance policies, your retirement plans, your annuities. These always require a conversation with your lawyer about exactly how you should title them and how they should be treated, because there's a lot of factors that go into that. The biggest thing is we want to make sure that we're not creating more of a tax problem for you by putting it in the trust or having it flow through the trust. The reality is most of these things, retirement accounts and annuities, they should never be in your trust. Occasionally life insurance policies go in your trust, but usually what happens is upon your death, those benefits pay out either to your spouse or to the trust. But those things are very tax sensitive, so require a good conversation with your accountant and your lawyer. This is an idea of what it looks like when your assets actually get distributed. So the first step is upon your death, all these things that you had transfer on death to, they're going to flow down and get reunited with the assets that you had in your trust. And then any assets that are going to pay out of your life insurance, your retirement plans, your annuities, they could all conceivably end up in this temporary holding place where everything is either liquidated, distributed, liquidated and turned into cash, or maybe you're going to make in-kind distributions, or your successor trustee is, meaning they're going to give the sofa to Molly and they're going to give the house to Betty. It just depends on what your instructions are. And really, I wanted to just have you think about your family structure. If you are leaving assets to the younger people, then you just want to think through, is this someone that really is ready to prepared to have an inheritance from me at any given time? Are they old enough, above 18? Are they mature enough? Well, it might be 20, 25, 30 years old before some people are really mature enough to receive a big lump sum distribution. With a trust, you can hold it in trust, you can distribute it over time, a third now, a third when you're 25, a third when you're 30. There's really just endless possibilities there. Once it's in this, all your assets are in this holding place, then that's where the distributions are made. And for example, you can instruct your trustee to give a third to charity and then a third to each of your 2 children, for example. Or you might skip your children entirely. It might be that your children are established and have plenty of money, and maybe you're creating more of a tax problem for them by leaving them your money, and maybe it would be more helpful to go straight to the grandkids. So you can do that with a trust. You can skip over your kids and go straight to the grandkids. Or maybe you want to keep your assets in your trust for the lifetime of your children, protect that money from your children's creditors or estranged spouses or themselves. Like I said, if they've got a substance abuse problem, allow them to benefit from the assets when they need something, but by and large, keep everything there to then go to your children to your grandchildren after your children pass away.